Hello viewers, welcome back. In today's video, we will look at how to integrate the NetWorker Authentication Service with your Active Directory. Integrating your Authc with AD gives you the flexibility of using the same authentication authority, which means no more maintaining a password repository or a worksheet with all the passwords that you need to support your infrastructure. For those who don't know much about Authc, Authc is short for NetWorker Authentication Service, which is a web-based application that runs within an Apache Tomcat instance on the backup server. The Authc provides the Networker environment with a token-based authentication and a single sign-on support. So this enables user to securely connect to the NMC server, the Networker server, to perform various operations. The NMC and Networker server do not authenticate the user against the LDAP authority. The NMC server requests user validation from the NetWorker Authentication Service. The NetWorker Authentication Service performs a lookup to determine the LDAP or AD group that the authenticated user belongs to in the external authority. When authentication succeeds, the NetWorker Authentication Service issues a token to the NMC server. Activities that you perform in the console window and the Networker Administration window uses this token information to ensure that the user can perform only the activities that the user has appropriate privileges to perform. This, as said before, is much easier and much cleaner to perform user management on Networker. On the screen, you can see the command that is used to integrate Networker with the Networker Authentication Service with Active Directory services. This can also be done on the NMC, which we will be seeing later on in the demo. So I just wanted to run by you the different configurations that we require, or different details that we require to complete the configuration. So again said, authc underscore config is the command line or the command that we use to create the integration, and these are the different options that we have. Now let's go ahead and look at each of these options one by one. So the table that we have listed here, so there are more than this. The table spawns to more than one sheet here. So this is the first sheet out of the three sheets that we have, and each on the left hand column we see the options that is required for the command, or the detail that is required for the command, and on the right hand side we'll look at what these details or where to get these details from. So the first information that we need is the config tenant ID. So this ID is nothing but it is just an identification number that you can provide, so that for any commands that are related to the Authc management, we can provide this particular tenant ID to be run. So we will see a couple of commands that uses this in the demo. Next is the config name. Config name is just a descriptive name that needs to be without spaces for the AD configuration. Now again, this is just to identify if you have multiple external authority configuration on your Authc services. Next is the config server address, which is nothing but the IP or the host name, which can be resolved into an IP address of your LDAP or your AD server. So the LDAP port number and the base DN. So the base DN is nothing but the DN of your domain. For example, my domain is crazyrove.com. So the domain would be, or the DN equivalent would be DC is equal to crazyrove, comma DC is equal to com. So this would be the distinguished name equivalent of the domain name. So we will look at this when we do the demo, so no worries if you're a little confused here. Next is the domain name. A domain name is the descriptive name without spaces, again for the domain attribute. So when you log in, this is the name that you would provide along with your login ID. For example, if my login ID is administrator or admin, then it would be if I provide the config domain as crazyrove, then it would be crazyrove \admin. If I give the domain name here as crazyrove.com, then the login that I would have to use is crazyrove.com/username or admin, which is my username. Next is the config user. So this is again as we looked or when I explained about the requirement, is the user that has full read access to the Active Directory or the LDAP. So again, this has to be in the DN format or the distinguished named format, which is which an example of here, which is CN is equal to it is the container name, and DC is again the domain name component, and so on. So again, we look at this when we do the demo for you to be for it to be clearer. Next is the password. So this is the DN password, which is the password for this particular user on the domain controller or as configured on the Active Directory. So this has special considerations where, and if you use special characters, this might not work all the time, especially with 8.2. So if you're using this configuration, again, it is for 19 or 18.2 and up. So this command and configuration would not work with 8.2, but yeah, the password that you use here it's better it does not have any special characters like @ or dollar or so on. Let's try to keep it as simple as possible as a combination of uppercase, lowercase, and numericals. All right, moving on, the next set of options. This is the config user search path. So config user search path is again a DN, that is a distinguished name, that specifies the search path that the authentication service should use when searching for a user in LDAP or Active Directory. So let's do one thing. Let's go ahead and look at how to find this. So here as an example, they have given the CN as users. So CN is equal to users. Let me go ahead and show you how to get this information, and so let's start from here. Let me go ahead and give you the information on how to get the user DN from the Active Directory. Let's go and hop on our Active Directory here, or the domain controller that we have. Go to tools. So you need two set of tools here. One is the Active Directory users and computers. Let's open that up. And the other one that you require is the ADSI edit, right? ADSI edit. Let's open both of them up. Have the Active Directory here. The DN or the user that we are going to use for the configuration is Rowan. So that particular user is somewhere here. So this is that user. So the display name is this, and the login name is Rowan at crazyrove.com. Let's go and see the equivalent DN name for this. So DN name can be got from the ADSI edit console. So let's connect it to our default domain. And if you see here, these are all in the DN format. So as I said, the user Rowan is in the container users, which is under crazyrove.com domain. So if I go ahead and go here, then you would see that this particular user is under users, and the full DN for this is CN is equal to Rowan De Souza CN user DC crazyrove dot and DC com. So CN again is container, which is the user itself. The next CN is the container above this, which is users, and DC is the domain controller component, which is crazyrove and com. Now this was the container. So for you, or when you do the configuration, you have to specify the DN for the container, which is CN is equal to user dccrazyrove.com in my case, but it can be possible that in your organization the containers are configured in a different way. So you would have to get in touch with your AD admin or the domain controller admin to check where all the users that belong to your team or your group reside on, and that particular list has to be provided uh, in this path. So that is the user search path. Next is the user ID attribute. So the user ID that is associated with the LDAP or the Active Directory. So this is usually the SAMA account when it is an Active Directory. So you can directly put that, or it is automatically filled when you're using the NMC. So let's see where to get that particular attribute from. So if you see the attribute list here, it is in here. So if you see the account name, which is Rowan, the attribute for getting this account name is SAM account name, and that is what you have to mention as a as the value of config user ID attribute. The next attribute is config user object class. So this is the object class that identifies the users in LDAP or AD hierarchy. Alright, the next parameter is the config user object class, which again for Active Directory is inet org person. So you usually don't need to worry about these parameters, because when you're using the NMC to configure it, these are automatically selected when you select the type of configuration you want to do. So moving on, so next is the config group search path. So this is the distinguished name or DN that specifies the search path that the authentication service should use when searching for the group in LDAP or AD hierarchy. So we have to specify a search path that is relative to the base DN that you specify. For example, again, if I go back and if I search for, let's say, group, okay, this is the security group that I have, which I have created, and this is the group which I am using to be configured on the NetWorker, because all the users that belong to my NetWorker team would be part of this DL. So I have to provide the distinguished name, which is this parameter here. Okay, this parameter here. So this is the name of the group, but the path or the container to search for this particular group is the CN is equal to group. So the data or the information that I have to provide there is this information, and it has to be relative to the domain name. So when I mention this, I need to mention only CN groups. I don't have to mention the entire distinguished name. So CN is equal to groups is all I have to provide in that particular with that particular option. Next is the group name attribute, and this is going to be CN, because if you see the name of this particular container, the attribute relevant to that is CN. So that is why you have to mention CN. Again, this will be automatically filled in. Next is the config group object class. So this is again for Active Directory, it is just called group. So just leave it as it is, because this is again going to be filled automatically. The last option is the config group member attribute. So for Active Directory, the value is mostly member. So this again is going to be automatically populated in your configuration. So these were the different attributes, and these were how to get the details for those attributes. If I now switch back to the initial command, you can now maybe recognize the different values that we have here. So the tenant ID we have mentioned as 33. Now this can be any number that you want. So this is just used as a reference when running the commands in the future. Config name is again just an identifier which you can mention any name, which has to be mentioned without any spaces. Config server is the domain controller hostname or the IP address along with the port, and the relative or the domain controller or the domain DN. The config domain is again the name of your domain. Config user DN is the user that you are using for connecting or for accessing the Active Directory. The DN password is the password for that particular user. User group attribute is member of. User ID is SAM account. We have already seen all this. Object class is person. User search path was CN is equal to user. This I have already shown you this. The group member attribute is member, so this is also be automatically populated. The config group name attribute is CN. We have already seen this. The config group object class is group. This is again automatically filled. The config group search path we had seen was CN is equal to users, which is relative to the Active Directory CN path. The object class is object class. It is an Active Directory configuration, yes, and if there are subtrees inside the search path, then it needs to search the subtree as well, and that is what is resembled by the parameter yes. So this is all about what is the information that is required to complete the configuration. Let me go ahead and launch the NMC now. So now I am on my networker management console. So my NMC is configured to the Authc running on NSR_Linux, but basically my NMC and NetWorker server are on the same server. But if in case you are looking at configuring this, so when you do whatever you're going to do in the next coming steps, you are actually integrating the Active Directory with the Authc on this particular server. So next, let's go to setup and click on external authority. Right click on the right pane and select new. So we are going to use Active Directory. If your environment is using a Microsoft Active Directory, then it is always this option, which is the Active Directory option, wherein the services are provided by the domain controller, which is running the Active Directory services. But if in case you're using any third-party, if you're using a third-party LDAP integration, then in that case you have to use the second option. But yeah, for most enterprises, it's always Active Directory. Let's give it an authority name. Let's call it cray0-com. Now the provider, my provider name is dc1.cray0.com, which is basically this host, If I take you here, so DC1 is my domain controller. The domain that I want to configure is cray0. The port number is as it is. So the DN, I'll quickly go to my AD and I'll right click here, properties, and I'll pull out my DN, which is this. Now this again does not need to be the complete DN, just the relevant. And then I put my password. I think this is my password. Then you can go to show advanced option if you want to give the group search name as the user search name. Let's go ahead and try that. And as mentioned earlier, the rest of the parameters of the classes and the attribute fields come auto-populated whenever you select the server type. If you change the server type, it is going to change accordingly. So the group search path here in my case is group. So if I go to properties and I say view, again just the CN for the group, and then for user search path, this would be the container for the user search path. Again, go ahead and search for the DN here, which is this. Say view. Again, it is the relative DN path. So this. And once this is done, we can go ahead and click OK. And we have an error. So I think the problem is with, let me reset my password because I don't remember it. It's locked. So switch back to the NMC and say OK. Okay, what seems to be the problem? So a couple of mistakes here. So I had to give the complete domain name and the complete DN, not just a relative DN. So quick note there. Then we click on OK. So the provider is successfully added. Okay, so once you are done with the configuration of external authority, let's go ahead and add a user. We'll go to external repository users. We'll call him Robin and the domain as crazyro.com and then say OK. Well, now this is added. Now let's test it by logging into our NetWorker server using the NSR login command. -u Robin and the domain name is crazyro.com. Okay, I'm on root. Let me switch to another user and then run this command again. Oops, sorry about that. And you see that it is authenticated successfully. Now that we know that we are able to authenticate the user using the Active Directory from NetWorker through the NetWorker Authc service, let's go and add some roles to the user that we have just onboarded. So this is again going to be an external role, and let's go ahead and so again, every time you do anything on NetWorker or add anything on NetWorker, it has to be a distinguished name. So that is going to be, let me add the entire group. So let me switch over to my server, then go to my group, right click on my group, properties, check out the distinguished name and copy the entire thing. Switch over back and paste it here and say OK. Okay, that's done. So I'm the networker administrator. So this particular option will give me access to make changes to the NMC as well. So please assign the roles appropriately as required. Let's go ahead and launch the NMC again and see if we are able to log into the NMC with this new user. So you have to use the domain crazyro.com. So I'm pretty sure you're always used to putting in just the domain name when you're logging into any of your Windows systems, but here you have to give the complete domain. So the password in and click on login. And there you are. So we have the authorization now to log into the NMC server. Let's go ahead and launch the application on the Networker Administrator window. Bring it in. Okay, now you see that I'm not able to see anything here, either clients or nothing. This is because I don't have the privileges yet to see anything within my networker server. So I have been provided administrator privilege on the NMC. Now it's time to go into the networker server. So I'm still logging in as an administrator here, and then go to server tab, go to users, and to add the new set of users or this particular group. So this is an L3 group or an L2 group. So I'm going to make them as administrators. So I'm going into the application administrators group, and under the external roles, I'm going to put the name of the security group which my user belongs to. So now by doing this, that is by adding the name of your security group into the user group in NetWorker, you need not come and add a user every time a new user is added to your team or when a user leaves the team. So all you'll have to do is remove the user from your security group in the Active Directory, which I'm sure might be mapped to more than one service. So here it is just with NetWorker, but you might have also mapped it with the uh, authorization on your Windows server or on your Linux servers or however that is integrated. So now let's go ahead and click on OK here and switch back to the NMC or the NetWorker console here. And if I go and check this now, you'll see that I have all the options, or I can see all the configuration here. In case you want to document these settings or these parameters that you've put in, I'll just run you through a set of commands that we can use to get the configuration and to document that. So we will be using the authc config command for this. So first let's get all the configurations available. For that we will be using this command. Let me switch over to root again. All right, clear the screen. Let's paste in our command and then hit enter. So from here you are going to get the config ID, which you can further use. This is the login for the administrator, so put in the password for the administrator user. So the config ID is 2 and the name of the config is crazy0-com. So that is what we had used. So the next command is the same authc config but with the -e find config option. So our config ID is 2. So let's go ahead and hit enter here. It's going to ask me for the password again. All right, so here you go. So this is the complete configuration of the this is the complete configuration that you just did using the NMC. So if you had used the command line, then you would use all these details instead. Right, so you can make a note of this in your documentation somewhere in your centralized repository, so that if in case there is an issue with the Active Directory or your current Active Directory is decommissioned, you can use these settings to configure it again, or if in case in a DR situation, you can also use this in that scenario. So next. Right, so this was a simple way of getting all the configuration using the command line. Now there is one problem with this kind of configuration, at least I think it is a problem from my point of view, because the configuration that we have here is something that we use for daily operations, and the user are going to use this domain controller for logging into your NetWorker server for daily operations. Now, in case your domain controller is lost, because as you can see, we have just one domain controller that we point out to be used in the configuration. So for some reason, if this crashes or during the patching something goes wrong and doesn't come up, then this domain controller is actually a single point of failure, which means that the Active Directory service, if not available, you will not be able to log in into your NMC with the normal user or the AD user that you have, and internally you'll have to fall back on using the using the local administrator. Now, in some cases, people also harden the authc service to not allow local administrator user, and in that case you are completely locked out. You'll have to go back again and change that configuration, restart the service in order to be able to use the local user again. So I think one of the ways to go to mitigate that problem is to have multiple multiple integration configuration for different Active Directories that are available in your network, so that if there is a failure of one domain controller, maybe your Auth can use the next configuration to connect to the next Active Directory or the domain controller in order to authenticate your user. So again, NetWorker integration with Active Directory gives you a centralized manner of managing your authentication, and the authorization again is completely controlled by the networker management console as well as the networker server in terms of the NMC groups and the networker user groups. So this is all I had for the topic on integrating NetWorker Authc with AD and LDAP. If you think that this particular video has helped you, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and leave a thumbs up, and also to share it with your colleagues so that everybody can gain some insight on how to do this particular task in NetWorker. Thanks for sticking with me till the end of this video. I hope you found this useful. If you have any questions or comments, share it with our community in the comment section below, or you can drop me a message at my Twitter account. I will see you on another video. Goodbye.